Welcome everybody.
Yeah, good morning.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, always better.
I'm Daniël Both. I'm working for Optiver in Amsterdam.
I'm Bartek Bi. I also work for Optiver, also in Amsterdam, surprisingly.
Yeah, so this is really a topic that we bug each other with on a daily basis. And before we really dive in, I also wanted to share a bit what my current experience is with these topics. Because I've seen a few people laying out now their DSC infrastructure, what they're doing with it, how they're doing with it. And still, it's a really complex topic. And you see that people put years of work into 45 minutes, which is basically impossible to do. So I hope we've found a format that will actually help you understand a bit what we are actually doing, and how we're doing it, and what our thoughts behind it are. So yeah, give us some feedback at the end of this session. I would really like that. Also, if you didn't like that, well, just tell, okay, what you didn't like, why you didn't like it, what we can improve for who knows next year. So, okay, let's first have a look at the agenda for today. First of all, I will walk through you with how we are going to solve, well, the problems that we have and a bit about the ideas behind it, how we are willing to solve those, how we want to solve those. Next, Bartek will dive into the configuration with you. That will be a Blitz demo, so we'll see how that goes. Next, we will explain actually what you saw him doing, and then we'll go back again and do it for you again, but then, well, hopefully in a bit less higher space. So first of all, the problem. The problem is here, we have, as you can see, we have a few problems that we would like to solve with our setup. So first of all is control. Well, controls are really, well, it's almost a buzzword. Yeah, we want to be in control. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, for us, that really means that we want to see who changed what, when, at which time, and also how it was done. And that basically comes back in all the parts that we also have stated below. Because, well, the next part is repeatability. We want to be able to, if we deploy a configuration to a server, and we apply the same configuration to another server, that exactly the same happens. So, why are you choosing DSC to do this? Well, DSC is especially good at this, because when you're running scripts, if you're running a script the first time, it will, well, do its job, lay out what you want to do, and go. And if you then execute that same script on the next node, that will also work the same there. But what if you run the script 2 times on the same node? You're probably in trouble now. And that's where the power of DSC lies. DSC is idempotent. It's another buzzword that I have to call out here, but it means that you can actually apply the same configuration over and over again, and if it's already in desired state, nothing happens. So you can be sure that it just works the way you want. Well, the next part of our setup is about knowledge sharing. And there we really discovered that if you are working in a team with multiple people, that you need to know what you are doing and how you're doing it. So I saw it also in another presentation of today. You need to work from a single source of intent. In our case, we choose a Git repository to do that. It seems to be used quite a lot these days. But it really works if you just have a single source of intent where everybody that needs to do anything on the servers is changing the config and applying it and creating a pull request there and then having it reviewed by somebody else that really knows, okay, this is what's going on, that's okay for me. And by reviewing it, first of all, I know what you're doing, I know how you're doing it, I know that you want to put this change into production, and that really helps you to just, well, collaborate with each other and also create bandwidth. Because, well, now I saw Bartek doing it, and he implemented some awesome code. Well, I can do that the same as well, right? It's just a matter of copy and pasting now. Now I understand what's going on there. Copy and pasting is a problem, though. And that's where our next part is coming from, the mistakes. Don't get me wrong, we don't want to avoid mistakes. Actually, I know mistakes will happen, and I'm fine with that. I mean, we're making mistakes all the day. He did a Mr. Typo session for a reason. It's really, and also while you're transferring configuration between systems, you know you're going to screw up. What I want is a quick feedback loop, and that's what I really liked from the, I don't know if any of you attended the DSC workshops yesterday, but what I really like there is get the quick feedback loop. It's really important to know as fast as possible this is not going to work in your production environment. And that's also something we thought about and then, well, relay it back for, okay, how can we implement that in our configuration? Yeah, the last one is audit. And there also it comes back to, well, if you do that in a repository, you do your commits, you know what's going on, and you can just trace back and know, okay, so this is what was happening at that time, and this was how my configuration was looking yesterday. That's something I think is really important. So, to first show you the first part, let's kick off our first demo. See how that goes.
Yeah, so the problem that we wanted to solve is, as Daniel mentioned, we already have some kind of idea how we can configure our servers. But the problem is that when you have multiple servers that look almost the same, they're almost identical. So let me try to open the ISC and move it to the right screen. Let's see how that goes. That's the right screen. Yeah, there you go. Come on, don't be shy.
I just duplicate it, otherwise it's better.
Yeah, I'm not very good with Windows, you know. Okay, so, yeah, now I don't see it. Can I switch to
Windows P?
Yeah. Okay, let's duplicate it so that we see the same. So the idea was that, okay, because we have, oh yes, I see it myself, I can read it even. Clearly, Daniel is a younger person, so he can read those things, I cannot. Is it good enough? Perfect. Okay, so the idea was, okay, we have those multiple servers that are almost the same, but we have to figure out a way to actually make them look like maybe be able to configure them using a single thing. So what we actually use in Observer, we use partials. I'm not sure how many of you are using partials. Please raise your hand. Nobody does it. Okay, we do that. And we do that for a living, and we actually are pretty good at that. But we decided, okay, we have those partials. But the problem with partials is that if you have the role of the server, and it's almost identical to other server, then you have two partials that are alike. They're almost the same. So then the problem is that once you decide to change those things, you have to change both of them at the same time, or even three of them, or even four of them, or even five of them. So the moment you try to change those things, you have to have the problem that if you forget to change one of them, then those doesn't work. So the idea we had that let's just split it up. So we have the partial, we have meta configuration next to it, and because this meta configuration will be related to the node itself, not the partial itself, we'll keep it with the configuration data. I know. The meta configuration, but yes, meta configuration, how did we know that it's proper? Well, then we decided to use classes, and because we have classes, we can generate commands on top of that, and because we have commands based on top of that, then you can use those commands to try and generate those configuration data, and then everything is fine because it all works fine. I can actually show you that, but it will just probably need to slow down a bit.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we did we actually lose the whole room? Nice.
So it's not just you, right? That's what you want to say.
Phew. Okay, you completely lost me there, man. Let me get you out of PowerShell and get to PowerPoint, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't master that part, for sure.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So, okay, that didn't really went well. Let's see if we can get PowerPoint to actually show you something there.
Hello, no? PowerPoint.
Calm, you can do it.
Why do you have Steam running? Were you playing the game before the presentation?
I just rebooted, you remember?
Okay.
Okay. let's have a look first. So you were talking about partial configurations, right?
Yes.
So what is a partial configuration?
So imagine that your server has a role. It can be SQL Server. It can be your file server. You define your partial where you specify all the PowerShell elements in it, keep it in one file, and then apply this configuration to a single node or multiple nodes if you really want to.
Okay, so does a node only has one partial assigned at the same time, like I see here?
It can have multiple partials, and the same partial can be applied to multiple nodes. Therefore, we kind of abstract out the role of the server from the actual node.
Okay, so why do we need these partial configurations? Can't we just use one partial one configuration per node? Isn't that easier?
Well, yes and no. I mean, depends. Maybe if you use stuff like datum, maybe then it's easier. But if you don't, and the problem is that keeping those partials separate make sure that you explicitly say, okay, this server has these roles, and you also don't have a situation where your configuration is just that long and you don't even know what the server is doing in the end. You just have simple configuration for node that tells it, okay, you're supposed to be file server, and you have baseline and maybe Scrum agent installed on you. That's it.
Okay, so basically with a partial you define a piece of configuration that you can assign to a node, and a node can have multiple partials.
Yes.
Okay. I understand that one. So now, me as an admin, what am I working with in this case?
Assuming that you are admin that just manages the server, all you have to do is you select the partial from the one that we already created for you, or if you don't have one, we just ask us to create one that fits your needs, and then just you say this server should have this role, that role, this role, and that's it.
Okay, and if I have 3 different file servers, then I need to copy-paste my partial configuration?
That's the problem. So if you have to have more of the same, the chances are that those partial configurations will be copy-pasted, but don't forget, whenever we change something in one of them, you have to change yours as well, because otherwise it's broken. So yeah, you have to be careful with those guys.
But that's going to give us problems, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So I think you also had a solution for that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's have a look how that looks. So what do we see here? Well, I see we added a piece of configuration data. Well,
yes.
What is that configuration data?
So configuration data is something that we already use to define how the LCM should behave. So we should tell to individual nodes, okay, you should have those roles. You should have this pool server. You should use this pool server. So anything that goes to LCM. So that's where the configuration data is being used at the moment. The idea is that if we combine it with the partial configurations, and therefore create a meta partial configurations, we can have the same information in the configuration data. Therefore, if we have more of the same, we can have this information stored where it belongs. So when it describes the node that it should go to. Okay,
I see. I heard you calling a new term, meta partial.
Yes.
How is that different from a regular partial?
So regular partial is relatively static. It describes the role as it is. So there's no way to customize it. Meta partial, on the other hand, is something that you can customize with the information that you store in your configuration data. So you have 3 SQL servers, each with different instances on them. But this instance name will be stored in configuration data, but everything else that actually describes how the SQL server should look like will be in the partial. Those 2 combined create a MOF document that you can deliver later to your node.
Okay, I see. So this configuration data that you're mentioning, is that mapping one-to-one with the partial?
So the mapping is not to the partial. Configuration data stays on the node. It maps to node. Part of it is related to this partial, so there will be section in the configuration data that will be one-to-one with partial. But the configuration data is one-to-one with a node still.
Okay, I see. So the configuration data defines the state of one of my servers.
Yes, so if you want to change a service as an admin, you don't have to go to the changing and copy-pasting all those partials to your server and modifying them there and making sure that they are current. All you have to do, you go to your configuration data for your server and you specify, oh, by the way, I want a SQL server, and by the way, my instance name is this. That's it. We will take care of making sure that when we change SQL Server partial, everything that we change there will apply to all of them, not just the ones that we remembered to change.
Okay, I see. So how does this partial consume that configuration data?
So that's the nice part about partials and configurations in PowerShell in general. It has configuration data parameter. So there's really nothing we have to build ourselves. It's something that already there. We just have to use it. The idea is that we just put a section, special section for our partial, so we kind of read this configuration data for our partial, and we use that information within the partial itself. Everything else can go to Node. We don't care about that part, but the part that we care about is the section that we define for the given partial.
Okay, so basically the piece of configuration data you need is like you use that as a parameter to your
Yes,
partial.
when I call it partial, I call it with a configuration data.
Okay, and now me as an admin again, what am I managing in this case?
Yeah, you just put your configuration data document when you have to modify those partials. There are some problems potentially there, but generally you just have to modify the section and you are good to go.
Okay, I see. That's already, it feels a lot easier because it's less copy and pasting of code. We just have one place we can look, okay, how does my server look? But how do I know that I'm putting the right things in the configuration data?
Yes, so that's where testing kicks in.
Okay.
You did mention...
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, let's first have a look, okay, how that looks. Yeah.
So yeah, that's more or less what we have. All nodes is the part where LCM is responsible and interested in. The bottom part, file server, defines my file server. So I'll tell it, okay, this is where I have my shares, this is what I want to do with the default root permissions, and this is the shares I have. So as you can see, it's a collection. So if I have more, I just need to add one more, second, third, fifth, and depending on the server, this information can be different.
Yeah.
But the file server role will stay the same.
Yeah, and I think I can even understand this, because looking at this, if you apply this to one of the servers, it becomes a file server. It has the root of the file server is in DSC file server, and I get a share in there called meta.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, so back to the testing part indeed. So we added a class here now, I see. What are these classes? What are they doing?
So the problem with the meta configuration is that you don't upfront know what you want to see in those meta configurations, unless you have something that defines their structure. And that's where the classes are used. We can create a class per partial and describe for this partial, I need this amount of information. Otherwise, I won't be able to work. So for example, in the file server example that we just saw the seconds ago, I need to know where you will put your root folder. I need to know if you will apply this root permissions, and I need to have some shares. I mean, file server without shares is kind of useless. So that's what we do in this class that we just validate. First of all, that I got everything I need, and also that you didn't went into trouble to put something that I won't be able to consume, so I kind of warn you. So this is actually following the principle that you mentioned, that we don't mind failing, but we want to fail as soon as possible and make those failures happening in the code rather than in production later. So the class actually helps me prevent that, because I can just specify I need this information. I can also prevent you from having any typos, because I will validate it and just test it. I will tell you, okay, you made a typo. You won't deliver, for example, you won't try to create shares on, I don't know, some foo : /. We don't have such disks in Windows, so you won't be able to do that. And that's all I can do with just by defining the class and using it later in the testing. Preferably faster, because I don't know about anything else I could use for that.
So basically what this class is helping us with is that we can have a standard?
Yes, standard, we avoid typos, we help you.
Yeah, because you know, I at least know what I need to input.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and it will ensure that the input that we have will work in the partial configuration.
Yeah, that's also very important. So once it arrives to the partial works. It doesn't, during compilation phase, it doesn't fail. So it fails even before you go to the compilation part. Okay,
so how do we test that input? How does that work on a technical?
Well, we just try to take the class and assign the values to it. If we can assign them, then it's fine. If not, then it's not okay. So we have the validation set, we have other things. On top of that, if we really insist, so if we have something that spawns multiple properties, we can have validate method that we will call. So we assign all the properties to the, all the values to the properties that we have on our class. We run validate method. If it fails, we know that we screw up.
Okay. And does this change the partial configuration?
No.
Oh, okay. So we just need to add that class, add our tests. And,
yeah.
Okay. And back to the admin again. What are we managing now?
Well, management haven't really changed much. The only advantage you gain from these classes is that first of all, you get this, like, okay, you made a typo, you get this feedback quicker. So we close the loop faster. Therefore, you can fix your code before even showing it to somebody else, so they don't laugh at you or just make jokes of you during the lunch. I don't know. And also, you don't risk that you produce a partial that will arrive to your production machine that will not work. And on top of that, you basically have just a means to figure out if you did the right thing. So did you miss something? Did you include everything that we need to create the proper partial? You have this information in there. Okay,
I see, but yeah, it still feels so. I can put wrong data in the configuration data, but somebody will hit me with a stick earlier.
Yes, but if we can move to the next slide. I mentioned that we can, because we have a class, now we can take this class and generate commands based on them. So then, instead of writing it manually, you can run a command and get output that our partial expects. And you will have the same validation, same rules, everything will be covered, so you will have all those tests running before you even put this information in a file. So you cannot screw up on creating or updating the file or creating a new one. You already have this validation.
Okay, so why do we then exactly generate that module that is for the validation? And it gives us some easier input. Are there any other advantages? I mean, you're the tab completion guy.
Oh, yeah, of course. Come on, validate set, right? If you have validate set or anything else like that, you can always set, okay, I want the ensure to be present or absent, not maybe.
Yeah. Okay, and I see indeed, so we get this PowerShell module. I hope I don't need to do a manual task to create a function for each class, right?
Okay. Wake up. It's 2018. No manual work at all. So because we have classes, we have AST, we have other tools, we can generate these commands based on the classes that we write. So we write the classes, that's a manual effort because you have to show others what your partial expects. But the moment you have the classes, you just run a command, single command, and the module is generated for you. You just need to make sure that you push this information to the Git and just merge it to the master.
Okay, so that sounds a lot easier indeed. And as an admin now, I'm still managing the configuration data, but...
Yes, that haven't changed. But the advantage is that now you don't risk of tester telling you that you did the wrong thing. It's already the command that you use to generate this partial configuration, meta configuration for your partial, already tells you, no, you shouldn't do that, and also helps you avoid those mistakes with the tab completion and everything that comes with it.
Okay, so I'm just loading a module now, executing the commands I already know, or at least I can tab complete them, and then they're used as parameters to the configuration data,
yes,
which will boil up to become actual configuration.
Yeah, we'll change your server and change your world.
Lovely. Okay, so do you think we can give it over to you to go through this slowly?
Yes, I can give it a try. I cannot promise anything.
Okay, let's...
Thank you. Okay. Let's first make sure that we have the environment set up. So first, just to be sure, I will remove this share that we will generate in the end. So before we go into details about how the actual meta partials work, I want to show you briefly how partials in general work. So the essence is that if we have a partial configuration, the There are two key things here. You have to know that what your name of the configuration is, because that's the one you will also use later when defining which partial you want to use. But under the hood is just normal DSC configuration. It's not different from any other configuration that you might use. So it will have the configuration data that you normally use. You know, in this case, because we configure file server, so we say, okay, this is the people that should have rights, this is the people that should not have rights. This is the shards that we want to create, and it's all nice and dandy. If we go back, back to the one that I was looking at. Thank you very much. So if I run this configuration, what will happen? It will generate a MOF for me. So I have a MOF for the computer that I'm sitting on. Now I may attempt to apply this configuration. Let's look at this MOF first. So it's not that different from any other configuration script that you will normally see. Important bit, again, is just configuration name, because that one is used by LCM to figure out which configuration to use, which actually configuration it is, sorry, because the use part is on LCM. Let's close that one, go back here. So the problem is that if I try to apply it just like that, well, actually it works, surprisingly. Damn it. So this is the configuration that I have now. It actually shouldn't work, whatever. So normally what I would do is, because this is a partial configuration, I would need to change the LCM first to tell it, okay, this is the roles you should have. Maybe it already had this role.
It could be indeed.
Yeah, so we are obviously testing a lot of demos beforehand. So this is the script basically just takes this configuration data, generates the LCM config for you based on the data and the configuration data. So the hostname.psd1, this LCM config is then saved as a MOF, and you can use it to configure your server. So if you look at that one, now I can just run it. And now I should be able to see my MOF again. This time is not MOF for configuration itself. As you can see, it's meta MOF, so this one goes to the LCM, so the local configuration manager. This is for my laptop that's in the backpack, so obviously we won't be able to apply the configuration to that one, but let's at least try to do that for the other one. And now I get an error about, probably it's error about the one that I really don't care about that much, so the one that is not present. Anyways, let's see the one we have here. So as you can see, that one was configured correctly. Oh, you have it the other way around. Yeah, that's the downside of presenting of somebody else's laptop. Things don't work the way you would expect them to. So
yeah, blame me.
Okay.
But what we at least see is indeed that we get a partial configuration assigned, which is called file server, and that will mean that it will actually accept that partial configuration.
This partial configuration is really static. So if I would have another file server, I would have to repeat the whole step. So I would have to create file server 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe name them better, but still it's just a question of how easy it is to stop updating the right things, and also how easy it is to mix up, or just basically just not update the file that you wanted to update the way you wanted to update it. So demo 2. In this one, let's just first set it up. So we can remove share again, remove the folder. So I'll now show you the metadata. So this is more or less how it looks like. You've already seen it in the previous slides. So as I said, we have part that defines our LCM as we had before, so that part didn't change. But additionally, the configuration data can contain any keys that you want. And we decided to have this kind of structure to make sure that we don't have to like have 10 flavors of the same. That's why you see a collection here. Well, in this case, it's not really a collection because you wouldn't have multiple file server roles on one box, but you can definitely think about PowerShells that do things next to each other. And in this case, you would like to have a collection. Therefore, we decided let's make a collection from the get-go. And then again, shares, here we just have one, but again, to keep the structure predictable, we decided let's make it a collection, so even if it's just one share, it's a collection of one. Shouldn't be a problem for one, should help us if we ever decide to have more than one. So, now obviously the partial has to change because it has to be able to consume what I just did. So if you look here, we just do some magic here to kind of figure out, okay, which node actually we are modifying, what is the configuration name, we just take the name of the file, and we name a configuration after the file, we name the node after the node name, which is just a dynamic variable that you don't even have to define. We do that just because we are kind of anxious about not defining stuff like this, but you wouldn't have to really. And then we just, for each things in this section, so as you can see, we use $partial name here. Here, we use partial name. So this variable tells us, okay, we should take information from this section for each item in this collection. That's why we have the structure that I mentioned before. We just specify all the variables, everything that is required to set the file server the way we want it to be. So if we ever decide to, for example, apply default permissions, we do this section. If not, we just skip it over. So everything here is actually done based on the things, on the information stored in the section, in this configuration data file. So if we ever have next server, we just need to modify the PSD1 file, and it's enough to change the final, like how the picture of the partial configuration for the given server.
Yeah, so what this in essence will do, it will create, the output will be a configuration based on this partial created for this node. So the output will also be like file server dot, in this case, the name of my laptop, D440S.
Yeah, so if I actually do that, you will see it in a minute. So now the name of the file is just after the node. But if we open it, do we open it? Well, not just yet. Anyways, if you would open it, you would notice what Daniel just said, that the configuration name is slightly different. So now we also generate them off. We can try to set them off. Well, for some reason,
not happy about it.
Not really happy about that. Let's see if we actually did set it, or just complains for not good reason. Yeah, actually it did changes. I think the problem is that because we generated for Daniel's laptop and my laptop is over here, so communicating with it is kind of tricky. But yeah, there it was. So as you can see now, the partial configuration name is named after the node.partial. It's something that I believe the team promised that it works on the in-house build server. We never managed to get it to work, so we decided to design it ourselves. So if you really put them off like that on the pool server and you have the configuration partial like that, it obviously works because then the name match. So now we can just publish this configuration, we can start this configuration, and if we're lucky, or actually we did the right thing, we get our configuration proper. So now the system already knows, okay, this is how I should look like, and if I have a next server next to it, and have completely different share instead of meta, have a, like, I don't know, foobar, it will get the foobar share instead of meta share, just by changing the configuration data file for the given server.
So can we check if the shares now exist? Because I don't believe you, obviously.
I'm worried about that, but let's try it. It was meta, right?
Yeah. Okay, that works fine.
So, next off. If you don't mind, I will close these demos because then I can just see where I should go back. Okay, so let's now again get rid of it so that you can see that we actually do, it's not just smoke and mirrors, we actually do apply the configuration of the server. So if I would go back here and say get SMB share now, it should fail because I just removed it. So in this demo, we mentioned that we like to test things before we actually start generating MOVs or do anything that actually touches the production. So as Daniel mentioned, if you fail, you want to fail as soon as possible. You don't want to fail at the end where actually server should process your MOVs. You want to fail already when you analyze your code base. So that's where the tester is really useful. And we don't use it for unit testing so much in this case. We actually do some validation tests for the things that we care about. So let's take a look at that. So we mentioned that we use classes for that. This is a class that is next to the file share class, file server partial. And all it does, it specifies some parameters that we kind of expect to see there. So anything that will not follow any of those validations will fail. If we have a parameter that has a different type, it will fail. If we miss a parameter, because it's also an important element of the testing here, we also fail. If we have something extra, so somebody probably made a typo and just mistyped some configuration name, some configuration parameter, we also tell it, okay, that's not what you should use. So all this is just defined as a class. As you can see, we have a class for share. This one is actually defining how the share should look like. But we also have a class for file server. So not only we validate the root section of this, we also validate anything that's underneath it. So in this case, because the share was also a complex structure, we want to define what we expect there, because otherwise our partial will not work. So how do we test it? Let's take a look at that. Tree, come. So this is a test that we run. And I believe that's one of the first things I heard from Jakub. Never use for each in your tests. Well, we actually do that a lot. Because we obviously, when we have like hundreds of PSD1s, we want to test each and every one of them. You won't see that in this code, because this code is actually already kind of called from the central script. But anyways, as you can see, we just take the path to the PSD1 file, we figure out some information from it, and then we verify, for example, that the file name is lowercase, so we don't have upper characters. We want to keep it consistent. It's not really that important, but it at least makes it easier to figure out what the hell. We also check if we have the partial part of it that is required for the LCM configuration, so the whole all node section has to be there. We test if it's just one, because obviously we don't want to have the multiples if we just define one server. And that's part of it that just checks the all nodes, so it's not that interesting for us now. Important thing for us is here that we just take the classes, so this part of the code, and we try to create an instance of this class, and then assign a values to parameters, the properties of this class. I actually spoke with Jakub about that during this session. He mentioned that he has a really nice way to do some kind of beefy object tests. We may switch to that in the future, but for now, because we are on Pasta 3.4, we kind of lock down to the things that exist in this version of Pasta. Anyways, here we just check, as you can see, we use test cases, so at least we were kind of smart about it. So we take all the roles, properties that we have, so anything that exists in this meta property, meta partial, we test it one by one and try to assign the value that we see in PSD1 to the property of the class. Which means that if the class expects there are some regex to be to match, the property that doesn't match this regex will be rejected, so we will get failing tests. Overall, we just get results. So when we know that it's green, we know that our inputs are correct.
Yeah. And the way that we figure out if a partial actually accepts metadata is just by checking in the path, hey, is there a classes.ps1 with the same file? So if we find a classes.ps1 with the same file, we know, okay, this partial needs metadata, so then we will actually check for it, hey, did you supply us with that metadata?
Yes, so we have two flavors, obviously, because some roles doesn't really require metadata. So then we won't even bother testing because there's no point. But we also make sure that for anything that needs it, we have it. For anything that doesn't need it, we don't have it. So we don't have the weird configuration that doesn't make any sense. Okay, back to demo 3. So let's run some tests, because we can. So let me just switch so that you can actually see it, the whole thing. So as you can see, we test, again, this all nodes. So this is part where we just check things that are important for LCM. Obviously, we want to make sure that the inputs there are also correct. But the thing at the bottom is actually the thing that we care about today, as the part where we just do the testing for this meta partial. So we verify that, first of all, we have any section that we need and the section is correct.
Yeah. And here you also see that we also check the other way around. So we check, okay, do we have metadata for the partial that was assigned, but also the other way around. So don't we have any metadata for a partial that was not assigned? Because yeah, then that will mean that we won't do anything with the data.
The calls are maybe not that great, so I'm not sure if you can see anything in the back, but that's exactly the line that I highlighted, the line that Daniel mentioned. So that's how testing works, and that's what provides us feedback about the individual configuration data. We obviously may have broken configuration data, so let's just try to take a look at the one that is actually broken so that we can see, because one thing I liked about, I believe it was Rob's session from last year, any test that always works is broken. Don't use it. If you cannot make your test fail, you have a broken test. If you can make it fail, it means that you have a correct test, because then you can prove it actually does something, not just that you thought it will do something. So let's just prove that this test actually works. We have a configuration here that Daniel intentionally broke. So as you can see here, ensure is not really correct. I mean, as a human being, I can see it, but I expect machine to tell me that as well. And apply default root permission. Well, we expected Boolean here. Anybody who attended my session yesterday knows that how much I hate when people use strings to represent Booleans in PowerShell, and how bad idea it is. Because in this case, actually, we would convert it to Boolean later. We would get true. So intention of the author of this document was false. But if I would apply it using a DSC to the server, it will be true. That's not what you want. You want to fail fast. You want to fail now. You want to fail before it hits production. So let's give it a try with this configuration data document and see if it actually recognized the problems. So as you can see, yes, the first one is somewhere here. So it was supposed to be absent present, but it was present instead. Oh, thank you very much for this bug/feature. So it's absent or present. In this case it was present, so not really correct version of it. And here you also see that it's supposed to be Boolean, but it was string. I think it's reversed. The test should be actually the other way around, I think. But anyways, it just shows that if anything is not correct, it will just tell you, oh, you got a string, I was expecting Boolean. Sorry, that won't work because you don't know what you're doing. Oh, we're getting out of time. So I won't open this document. Basically, we also do test our partials. So if I will run this one, we also do some testing for the partial itself to verify that it will work. So we not just only test this configuration data of documents, we also test the partials. And the last demo that I wanted to show you how we can create the commands based on those classes, because this is a pretty nice thing to have. If you alter those partials, you really don't want to avoid situation when somebody is doing that manual, just goes manual and changes the things. So here first of all, we have a command that allows you to generate this. I won't open the command itself. You can look it up later. I believe we'll publish that to GitHub, so we'll be able to see all the code. So let me just .source this script so we can actually have the function in the session. If I run it now, it will just generate the config for my server. And it's doing so based on the parameters I specified. All those parameters are things that we require, so we can just generate it like that. And later, I can also update it. Did I run it or not? Just to be sure. And now I can just, for example, change the description of the server. And that's more or less how we actually work with those files. And I could potentially push this configuration again. Sorry, no, I need that one because I changed the location. So we made this command smart enough. Okay, if you have your configuration data files in this current folder, we don't really ask you for a path, so it's easier to run it. So here I'm actually telling it, okay, I want this node config partial, which we didn't touch, to have admin list with this one. And I can also, so this one actually merged it, so it as adding the things together. The other one, so I have also option to replace those. And if we go further to this commands that we actually use, the one that I mentioned, that we generate those modules rather than write them manually based on the classes. We can just see those commands here. It's pretty nifty, as all authored by Daniel. A lot of smartness went into this one. Let's try to run it because we are out of time, so no time to actually read the whole code. But again, it will be public later, so you can see it for yourself and maybe tell us where we can go do better. And if we now generate the module, so just with the single run like that, I just generated the module for all my partial meta configuration. I didn't have to do anything else. The command did everything for me, so I now just need to import it. And well, now you can see what the commands I have in this module. Commands that I have in this module. As you can see, it created commands for both classes that we had in this partial. So for file server, but also for the share object. And next to it, we have a syntax for the command. I can run it. And it will ask me for anything that I missed. I will not answer to these questions just yet because me typing things on stage is always a bad idea. And I still want to give the floor to Daniel so we can walk through the whole thing again. And here I just have a call where I actually have all the things specified. So let's just try to run that one. And if I open the sections, I don't see them at all, so let's just try it like that. So now you see that I have a hash table that contains everything that we need, including this default permissions that it's actually a Boolean this time around. We have a shared information, we have root path, everything that this file server partial was expecting. So now I can update my configuration with it. No, not insert, don't do that to me. And I can now generate the PSD one, and if I open it, you will notice that it has everything that it needs about this partial. So, brave enough to do the whole thing?
Yeah, let's do it. So indeed, but I think what was key here is that what we need to actually work with this configuration data, we try to put that all into functions that we can just call from PowerShell so that we don't need to do any manual copy and pasting in this file. Because that's what we really want to prevent, because we started with that. Obviously, we're growing into this command set, and we started with actually doing it by copy pasting, and you just notice that it is causing a lot of, well, bugs with, well, I forgot to replace an IP address. Okay, fortunately we had a test that actually caught it. Yeah. But imagine if you put that into production with two systems with the same IP address. We don't want to go there. So we now want to show you actually, okay, so what does this look like end to end? So let me set this up and load the functions that I'll actually need to show you. And what I will now do is, again, the same as Bartek just did, I'll create the meta class functions for my, the meta class module for all the partials I have. And I'll import that module. And let's set up another file server. You can see here I just call the nested object, and again, supply it with the parameters it needs, so then I'm sure that I have everything. Let's execute that. And in the section is now just what we need in the configuration data. So if we have a look here, there's a file server, and we can dive into the file server. We see again, okay, this is the same as you already saw in the PSD1. So, and that's now all generated from code, including all the validations we do. Because if I would try, for example, to make this one, well, false, that will just work, of course. But if I put in an ensure instead of, well, be there, and I execute this, that should fail
be there.
because, well, that's not in the set that I expect there, right?
Yeah.
Present. So now I can actually go through my host configuration and create that and test it also in the same step. So all my config was correct. And well, just to be sure, we also test the partial before we deploy. That is also now correct. Now let's load our configuration data. And then we apply that configuration data to our partial. So that outputted a MOV file for me. And now I can actually set that configuration, publish it, and then execute it on my box. All checked beforehand, and I'm sure that what I did beforehand will indeed work, and we see it does actually work. Thank you, Demo Gods. Thanks. I don't know how much time we have left, but 5 minutes, okay. So
plenty of time.
This doesn't cover everything yet, right? Because we also had a scenario where it clusters. And there, you actually do want some parts of the meta configuration to be exactly the same between those two nodes. So how do you solve that here? I mean, I don't want to go and copy-paste between configuration data because that's just moving the problem from one to another. So what we thought of that is what we can actually use is, because we're having this hash table anyway, we can just include data from other PSD1s in our own. So how do we do that? Well, we made a short demo of that one as well. So let me set that up. And then go there. And now if we have a look at this file server PSD1, this is just only the configuration for a file server. So you see that there is no other node configuration in here anymore. It's just how my file server should look. And that is the file that we're actually going to use to, well, include in our configuration data. So I'll update my configuration data so it will actually have an include block. So everything in the include block, we just have a file name there. Of course, we have a class here to actually test that what is in the include is actually correct. But what's in the file name, just load that file as extra configuration data also. So let's run that. And now let's import the PowerShell data file. And you see we changed the function now, because what our internal function actually does is just pick up what is in the includes and then make that a key in the hash table and then remove what was in the includes before. So if we execute that now, then we can see in the configuration data, I just end up with, well, my extra file server. I had some extra config in this one as well. But now I just have my file server there as well. And before that, it was only the include that was listed there. So now we can again call that. And now I would be able to also, well, with that MOV file again, go and execute the same configuration again, but now using an include statement. Now there is some more funny stuff we can do now, because we not only know from a partial point of view what the data is for that partial, but we also know the data for other partials, because we're passing in the whole configuration data document. That means that in my partial configuration, I can actually make decisions based on what I have in other sections. So other regions of my, let me open the file that we're using for this. So that is this file. So, for example, here I have a part external configuration, and the technical owner here is set to Windows. What I already built in the previous demo was that if the technical owner is Windows, then it should also create another folder on the file system, if it is a file server. And that is also something you can do now, so let's have a look at how we did that. So, if we have a look at this file, here we can actually see at the end that I included a statement that says, if you have the technical owner Windows in your configuration data, then add this also to the configuration. So this way it's really easy to make your configurations dynamic and make decisions even what is based on other parts of the configuration. It's quite cool if you ask me.
And especially in this case, external configuration, you probably noticed there was something like CNAME. So what we do with that in production is that we actually assign a group some ID to shares. And because we don't want to make any decisions based on the host name, because if you ever migrate the file server, you would have to create new groups and everything. We stick to CNAMEs there. Therefore, if I have a CNAME information, I can make a guess, okay, the group that should have edit rights or write rights or any rights to my share is this. So let's say foo bar name of the server, in this case CNAME, not the host name, underscore RW, DLG, or something like that. So I can make those decisions based on information that is not necessarily in the same section, so I don't have to duplicate it again, risking that I will make a mistake.
Okay, that was the end of the demos. To do a quick summary, this is really built for us to make the mistakes as early as possible. By setting up the classes and creating the functions from the class, you get output as an admin right away, and you know that if you can execute the function, it will actually work in production. So that's really where we validate and we test our input, and we know that part of configuration, it's going to work. And we keep it manageable by just auto-generating it. If you had to manually write this all the time, that's just adding to your pile of work, and you have enough to do anyway. So by auto-generating it, it keeps it manageable, and it really, for us, provides that value that we know, okay, this is, when we set up a class, we get the function and we can use it right away. So, any questions? Go.
What would happen in the case where you use the include if you had another part of the configuration that was already trying to configure the password?
Okay.
So actually what happens, those two hash tables are being added to each other.
Yeah, so the question was, the question was indeed, what happens if you have an include statement and then you have already a file server configured? I think the current way the code works is that it would overwrite it. But
no, actually, it just merges hash tables, so it adds them together. Should work fine.
Should work fine? You can just add them together. Yeah, correct.
Mateusz wanted to ask a question. I know. You can like hit us with this blue light. Just last question, and then we open we can be in the lobby so you can ask questions afterwards. Yes. So obviously, if you would include the pipeline in this presentation, it would take 3 hours. So that's why we skipped it. But obviously, it all happens automatically. So it's not like people running those tests. It's in our case, Bamboo running those tests for us. We can run it locally, obviously, because they run fine, but generally it's just a build pipeline that does it and allows you to merge those to master only when those tests succeed. You are not allowed to even think about adding it to the master if it's not.
Okay. Okay.
I
Thank you
didn't
then.
repeat the question.